In the brutal, unforgiving crucible of the Vietnam War, the ultimate contest for survival was often not fought with bullets, but with simple physics. Specifically, the contest against weight. For the conventional forces, particularly the American infantry, the philosophy was defined by abundance. The US military could deliver staggering amounts of ordnance, water, and rations anywhere on the map. The American soldier was taught to be self-sufficient, carrying everything he might need for days: copious amounts of ammunition, radios, medical kits, and, crucially, heavy, sealed cans of C-Rations, or later, the slightly lighter MREs. The result of this logistical wealth was debilitating. A typical American infantryman's pack often weighed upwards of 80 to 100 pounds, 36 to 45 kilograms. This immense burden slowed their movement to a crawl, sapped their energy in the suffocating heat, and turned every patrol into an exhausting, audible chore. When you are moving slowly and loudly, you are not a phantom, you are a target. The Australian Special Air Service Regiment, SASR, operated under a philosophy born not of wealth, but of hard-won experience in the jungles of Borneo and Malaya. Lighter is faster, faster is quieter, and quieter is survival. The SAS missions were long-range patrols, LRPs, often lasting 10 to 14 days, venturing deep into contested territory near the Cambodian and Laotian borders, where resupply was impossible and discovery meant annihilation. For these missions, the SAS identified weight as their most insidious enemy. Their goal was radical: slash the weight of the personal pack to an absolute minimum, sometimes under 50 pounds, 23 kilograms, even for a 2-week patrol. Ammunition, radio batteries, and specialized demolition gear were non-negotiable weights. Everything else, particularly food and water, was mercilessly scrutinized and discarded. The difference in approach was immediate and visual. While the US soldier staggered under a mountainous pack that forced his spine into a permanent stoop, the SAS trooper moved with a lithe, economical efficiency. His pack was compact, resting high on his back, allowing him to react instantly to contact. This philosophy demanded a terrifying compromise. If they weren't carrying the food, they had to find it. For the SAS, the jungle was not just a battlefield, it was a larder. They packed only a meager quantity of emergency rations, perhaps a few dehydrated soup packs, highly compressed energy bars, and a tube of the infamous Australian staple, Vegemite, praised for its dense vitamin B content. These rations were only intended to cover the first 3 or 4 days, or to be held back for a desperate emergency. After the initial days, the soldier's stomach became the responsibility of his own survival skills. The SAS were intentionally designing a logistics gap that they would be forced to fill with their wits. They had to eat the jungle to beat the enemy. This requirement to live off the land pushed their survival diet into territory that was not only unorthodox but, to their American allies, utterly repulsive. The very act of feeding themselves became a testimony to the extreme discipline and the iron will required to survive, where others would starve, or worse, be compromised by the noise and bulk of their own supplies. The planning phase for an SAS long-range patrol, LRP, was a masterclass in calculated deprivation. Every item was weighed, scrutinized, and justified. If it didn't directly contribute to the mission's success or immediate survival, it was left behind. Food was often the first luxury to be sacrificed. The standard SAS individual ration pack was a universe away from the bulky, often high-calorie, pre-packaged meals carried by US forces, where an American MRE meal, ready to eat, provided several thousand calories of processed food complete with a heating element and plastic spoon. The SAS pack was starkly minimal. The core of their carried diet consisted of a few concentrated energy blocks, often resembling hard slabs of pressed oats and sugar, designed only to delay exhaustion. They might carry a few packs of dehydrated soup mix, perfect for warming the soul on a cold jungle night without creating a large, telltale fire. And then there was Vegemite. This dense, black, salty paste, made from yeast extract, was a national staple and a tactical asset. It packed a powerful punch of B vitamins, crucial for maintaining energy and nervous system health during prolonged calorie deficiency. A tiny tin of Vegemite was often prized more highly than a tin of luxury meat, for it represented raw, compact sustenance. The crucial psychological element was that the SAS rations were deliberately insufficient. They were designed not to sustain the trooper, but to buy him time. They were intended to last roughly 3-4 days in a 2-week patrol. This created a forced contract between the soldier and the wilderness. By the end of the first week, the soldier had 2 choices: find food or face the inevitable physical and mental degradation of starvation. This created a massive advantage in stealth. An SAS patrol could lie motionless in a final lie-up position for 72 hours, perfectly camouflaged, consuming only sips of water and micro-portions of their reserves. They produced virtually no waste, no cans, no plastic packets, no telltale kitchen refuse, leaving no signature for the enemy to track. They were truly phantoms. In stark contrast, US Special Forces, like the Green Berets, carried much heavier Special Forces C-Rations, which were certainly more palatable than the general issue, but still bulky. This created friction when the units worked together. An American observer embedded with an SAS patrol often faced a choice between carrying massive weight to sustain his comfort and exposing the entire patrol to noise and bulk, or starving with his Australian comrades. To witness the SAS on patrol was to see men living at the extreme edge of endurance. They constantly operated in a state of controlled hunger, their minds sharpened by the low caloric intake, their survival dependent on acute observation. They had replaced the weight of food with the weight of knowledge of which leaf was safe to chew, which insect contained protein, and which creature moved slow enough to be caught without a fight. This deliberate decision to embrace deprivation transformed the SAS trooper from a traditional soldier into a hunter-gatherer, allowing him to achieve the ultimate tactical goal, making his logistical footprint zero. The SAS troopers' reliance on the natural environment was not a desperate invention of the Vietnam War. It was the product of a grueling, proven curriculum honed in another theatre of conflict, the Malayan emergency and the Indonesian confrontation in Borneo during the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds. These earlier conflicts were the SAS's crucible, operating in the harsh, mountainous jungles of Borneo, where external supply lines were virtually non-existent and the enemy was often the environment itself. The SAS quickly learned that textbook military doctrine was useless. They had to become experts in what was termed deep penetration patrolling. The most critical aspect of this training was the integration of indigenous knowledge. The Australians learned directly from the local tribes, the Iban trackers in Borneo, and the various ethnic groups in Malaya who had survived in the jungle for millennia. They absorbed lessons on what to eat, what to touch, and what to avoid, lessons that Western military manuals simply did not contain. The core philosophy taught in Borneo was, "The jungle will sustain you, provided you know how to ask it." This meant comprehensive training in ethnobotany, the study of local plants. The SAS troopers learned to identify and distinguish between the hundreds of different species of wild yams, tubers, and fruits, quickly separating the nutritious from the toxic. They knew which specific vines yielded drinkable water and which would paralyze their throat. They understood that water collecting in boughs or large leaves, though pure, could be instantly fatal if consumed without filtration due to the risk of larvae or parasites. Crucially, they learned how to maintain health in an environment constantly trying to break the human body down. The lack of proper hydration and essential nutrients quickly leads to tropical ulcers, severe fungal infections, and debilitating fevers, all mission killers. This training transcended finding food. It was about metabolic survival. The soldiers learned to track and hunt small game without firing a shot, using snares or silent traps that left no noise signature. They learned to read the habits of insects and animals to determine water sources. This deep knowledge became the fundamental difference between the SAS and their American counterparts. While US Special Forces received survival training, it was often theoretical or conducted over a few weeks. For the SAS, this level of intimacy with the environment was a precondition for service. When the SAS deployed to Vietnam, they brought this institutional memory with them. The jungles of Phuoc Tuy were geographically different from Borneo, but the underlying principles of tracking, foraging, and minimalist logistics remained the same. Because they were trained by the masters of the environment, the SAS approached the Vietnamese jungle not with apprehension, but with quiet confidence. They knew that when their scant rations ran out, they had the skills, the Borneo curriculum, to literally eat the jungle and keep moving, thereby maintaining the silence and stealth that were their ultimate weapons. Once the SAS patrols had exhausted their scant carry-on rations, they turned immediately to the most abundant, reliable, and easily acquired source of protein in the jungle: insects and their larvae. For the average Western soldier, this was a line rarely crossed, but for the SAS, it was essential survival and tactical discipline. In the humid, decaying environment of the jungle floor, protein rots quickly. Large game is difficult to hunt, difficult to clean, and requires fire a loud, smoky beacon to the enemy. Insects and larvae, however, are found everywhere, are almost silent to acquire, and offer a dense, nutritious payload. The key was knowledge, knowing where to look and what was safe. The SAS troopers were masters of finding what they grimly referred to as jungle seafood. Their preferred foraging grounds were rotting logs, damp earth, and the inner cores of certain jungle plants. They would carefully peel back, bark, or split open decaying wood to reveal plump, cream-colored grubs and beetle larvae. These grubs were calorie-dense and contained high amounts of fat and protein, while the sight of them would induce vomiting in the uninitiated, including many US Green Berets who encountered the Australian habits. The SAS consumed them with a pragmatic efficiency. The troopers understood that a mouthful of larvae was the difference between maintaining alertness during a 12-hour static watch and succumbing to weakness. Preparation was also key to mitigating risk. While some very specific larvae were safe to eat raw, most were lightly cooked to kill parasites. Crucially, this cooking was almost always done over a minimal, smokeless heat source. They would use a sliver of heat from a tiny, self-contained fire, perhaps using dry tinder and a few glowing embers, or, more often, roast the insects or larvae over a hot rock that had been heated deep within a carefully managed fire pit, allowing the heat to dissipate quickly without releasing large plumes of telltale smoke. Ants were another staple. Certain species of large jungle ants and their eggs provided a powerful, acidic burst of protein and flavor. While bitter, the nutritional value was significant. The troopers learned to locate termite mounds, massive structures of compressed earth, and extract the pale, wingless insects, often eating them by the handful. The tactical advantage of this diet was profound. An American patrol might have to spend valuable daylight hours fishing or risking a snare for a small bird, creating noise and leaving a large physical footprint. The SAS could stop silently, consume a handful of protein-rich jungle seafood, and resume movement in minutes, leaving nothing but disturbed leaves. The ability to look at a rotten log and see not decay, but dinner, was the ultimate psychological hurdle overcome by the SAS. It marked them as creatures of the jungle, capable of sustaining themselves where their more conventionally supported allies would quickly wither. This adaptation was a quiet, powerful testament to their superior integration into the hostile environment of Vietnam. While grubs and insects provided essential calories, the most concentrated, reliable source of fresh meat in the Vietnamese jungle was the reptile. This is where the Australian SAS truly earned the moniker of snake eaters and diverged most sharply from the practices of their allied counterparts. For most Western soldiers, encountering a snake in the jungle meant immediate danger, a threat to be killed with a burst of automatic fire or avoided entirely. For the SAS, a snake was a silent, perfectly packaged meal. The SAS trooper was trained to view the snake with cold, professional pragmatism. Snakes were abundant, especially near water sources. They could be tracked and caught without the explosive noise of a firearm, and they carried no large internal parasites common to mammals. Furthermore, the act of catching and killing a snake required only quiet focus, not the exhausting pursuit required for catching game like jungle fowl or wild pig. The expertise required was immense. Vietnam is home to some of the world's most deadly venomous snakes, including the king cobra, the banded krait, and various species of highly aggressive pit vipers. Misidentifying or mishandling a snake meant a sudden, agonizing death, often far from medical help. The training the SAS received was meticulous. They learned the distinct movement patterns, coloration, and defense mechanisms of the various species. They were taught to distinguish between a defensive posture, a snake, ready to strike and flee, and a sluggish one, a snake that has recently fed and is vulnerable. The preferred method of acquisition was swift and surgical. Using a long, sturdy stick or the butt of a rifle, the trooper would pin the snake's head to the ground. Then, with a practiced hand, the trooper would grab the snake just behind the skull and quickly sever the head. The muscular body, still writhing with reflex, would be safely contained. Preparation was immediate. The head was buried or discarded far away, eliminating the venom. The skin was stripped, and the long, pale muscle meat was either wrapped around a stick for roasting or cut into small pieces for a light stew. Again, the cooking process was dictated by stealth. The meat would be grilled over the residual heat of a handful of embers or baked on hot stones, techniques that produced minimal smoke and smell, ensuring the meal did not betray the patrol's position to the enemy. This willingness to consume reptiles was perhaps the greatest psychological barrier overcome by the SAS. It symbolized their complete surrender to the jungle's terms. To their American counterparts, who were often terrified of the fauna, the sight of an Australian trooper calmly preparing a venomous cobra for dinner was a shocking display of self-sufficiency and iron nerve. The snake-eater's moniker was, therefore, a badge of honor. It didn't just indicate survival skills. It indicated a psychological dominance over the most hostile aspects of the environment. It meant the SAS had achieved a state of adaptation that transcended conventional soldiering, allowing them to remain light, fast, and silent, fueled by the very things that made other men pause in fear. In the jungle, food scarcity can be tolerated for days, but water scarcity is a rapid killer. Dehydration in the suffocating heat and humidity of Vietnam could lead to incapacitation, delirium, and heat stroke in a matter of hours, compromising the entire patrol. For the SAS, this meant that finding water was not a secondary survival skill, it was a primary tactical imperative. The conventional military approach to water was simple. Carry it. But a gallon of water weighs 8.3 pounds, 3.8 kilograms. For a 14-day patrol, carrying sufficient water was logistically impossible. Therefore, the SAS had to develop extreme expertise in field hydrology. The most dangerous water source was the obvious one: rivers and large streams. In areas frequented by the enemy, these sources were often polluted by human and animal waste, or, worse, deliberately booby-trapped with submerged grenades or wires. Drinking untreated river water was a guaranteed route to debilitating dysentery and severe gastric distress, a sure way to expose the patrol. The SAS focused on silent water. They were experts in tapping into the jungle's internal reserves. This included identifying and carefully cutting specific jungle vines, often called water vines, that stored clear, pure water. The trick lay in cutting the vine at the base first, then immediately cutting it higher up. If cut from the top, the pressure would suck the water back up into the roots. The liquid was often slightly bitter or woody, but completely sterile and life-saving. Another technique involved exploiting the jungle's microclimates. They learned to collect condensation or dew by wrapping a piece of cloth around the trunks of smooth, non-porous trees. They also used large, waxy leaves or plastic sheeting to create dew traps overnight. For groundwater, the SAS taught themselves a crude but effective filtration method. If a source was heavily contaminated, they would dig a hole next to the contaminated area, like a stream or muddy pond. As water seeped slowly into the new hole, they would fill the bottom with layers of finely crushed charcoal from old fires, sand, and cloth. This acted as a rudimentary filtration system. While the water still required chemical treatment, using the purification tablets they carried, the process reduced the sediment and large contaminants, making the tablets more effective. The knowledge extended to recognizing plants that held water, such as the large, concave pitcher plants or the water held inside the boughs of certain species of bamboo. The key tactical advantage was that all these methods produced no noise and left a minimal signature. A large US unit, refilling canteens at a stream, created an audible, visible target. An SAS trooper silently collecting condensation from a vine was invisible. By eliminating the need to haul heavy water supplies and mastering the art of harvesting water directly from the environment, the SAS maintained their speed and stealth. The ability to find water silently, efficiently, and safely was arguably more critical to their long-term success than any of their dietary choices, ensuring that the team remained tactically viable even in the driest, deepest parts of the enemy's territory. The SAS troopers, mastery of survival, the ability to subsist on insects, snakes, and filtered swamp water was not merely a demonstration of physical hardiness, it was the foundation of their tactical superiority in Vietnam. Every decision to forage instead of carry, every decision to use a stick fire instead of a large flame, was a direct contribution to the patrol's core mission, remaining invisible. The tactical advantages were manifold and critical. 1. Reduced noise signature. The American military's reliance on cans, aluminum foil, and plastic packaging meant their patrol movements were often betrayed by the sheer quantity of non-degradable refuse. Opening a can of C-Rations or tearing a tough plastic MRE packet in the dense jungle created a distinct sound that could carry hundreds of meters in the still air. The SAS diet, relying on raw or minimally processed food like grubs, berries, and snakes, produced virtually no packaging waste. When they ate, it was done in near absolute silence. This allowed them to execute static observation missions lying motionless near an enemy trail or base camp for days without the enemy ever sensing their presence. 2. The zero logistical footprint. If an enemy patrol found evidence of a previous Allied unit, they could track them. US patrols left trails of discarded cigarette butts, ration trash, and sometimes unburied human waste. The SAS left nothing. Every single piece of refuse was either burned down to ash, meticulously buried, or carried out. Since their food sources were primarily organic and immediately consumed, their physical presence left no detectable signature for the NVA trackers to follow. They moved through the environment like phantoms, with no need for resupply drops that risked exposing their location. 3. Increased range and endurance. The most direct benefit was the drastic reduction in pack weight. By carrying 30 pounds less than a US counterpart, the SAS trooper could cover greater distances, faster, maintain higher situational awareness over extended periods, and expend less energy in the searing humidity. Crucially, when the patrol needed to move quickly, such as during an emergency extraction or when running a hot pursuit, the lighter pack allowed for sprints and sudden changes of direction that a heavily burdened soldier could never manage. Their endurance was maximized not through constant eating, but through metabolic efficiency, fueled by small, sustained bursts of nutrition from the jungle itself. 4. Psychological resilience. Operating in a state of controlled hunger, sustained by unusual and often unsettling food, honed the SAS troopers' mental discipline. It was a constant psychological test. The ability to calmly catch a snake, cut its head off, and cook it, while knowing that an enemy unit might be only meters away, built an iron resistance to panic and discomfort. This resilience meant that in a critical contact situation, the SAS soldier was less likely to succumb to fatigue or fear. They had already conquered the most fundamental threat to a soldier, the threat of starvation and helplessness. They trusted their own skills above any resupply chain, giving them a mental edge that no amount of canned food could replicate. The snake-eaters were feared not because of the size of their guns, but because they had eliminated their most basic human needs, effectively transforming themselves into self-sustaining predators in the enemy's backyard. The Australian SAS regiment's tour in Vietnam yielded no grand, sweeping battles or massive conventional victories. Their success was measured in intelligence gathered, targets identified, and, most importantly, lives saved through stealth and unparalleled fieldcraft. The most potent symbol of their unique excellence was their relationship with food, the stark distinction between the snake-eaters and their better-provisioned allies. The difference in diet was a reflection of a profound philosophical divide. The US forces, fighting a war of attrition, relied on logistics and technology to overpower the environment. The SAS, fighting a war of insurgency, relied on symbiosis and adaptation. They understood that in the jungle, the most successful soldier is the one who most closely resembles a local predator, light, silent, and self-sufficient. The stories of the SAS trooper calmly roasting a snake over embers, or consuming a handful of grubs while on a deep reconnaissance mission, became legendary not just because they were gruesome, but because they represented the ultimate victory over circumstance. When US Green Berets encountered the Australian patrols, they often reacted with a mixture of revulsion and awe. They were horrified by the meals, but they could not deny the results. The SAS patrols were consistently lighter, moved with unmatched stealth, and maintained a higher tempo of operations with fewer casualties than any other unit in the task force. The survival diet was not an end. It was a means to achieve ultimate stealth. By carrying only what was absolutely essential and trusting their ability to forage for the rest, the SAS eliminated the bulky, noisy logistical chain that compromised larger units. Their lighter packs allowed them to achieve speeds and maneuverability that often astonished the enemy, who struggled to track patrols that left virtually no trace. The enduring lesson of the snake-eaters is that true resilience is not about strength of arms, but about adaptability of mind and body. It underscores the fundamental principle of special operations. Success is found not through conforming to standard military procedures, but through the deliberate rejection of those procedures when the environment demands innovation. The refusal of the SAS to be weighed down by conventional rations was their greatest tactical gamble, yet it was also their most brilliant move. It forced them to master the environment, turning the hostile jungle into a dependable supplier. This skill allowed them to remain in the shadows longer, strike harder, and disappear without a trace. Ultimately, the SAS left Vietnam with a legacy built on the quiet mastery of the environment. Their ability to survive on the snake, the grub, and the filtered dew remains a powerful testament to the fact that in the most challenging conflicts, the human spirit, stripped down to its barest essentials and armed with knowledge, is the most formidable weapon of all.